Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to this morning's session of Change's Be Connected virtual conference. I'm Carolyn, your host, and I'm here to introduce to you a versatile speaker, Vidhu Bansal Dev, who will present to us the importance of data in pharma and consumer development. Vidhu is a senior, highly experienced R&D leader with a passion to deliver differentiated, meaningful, and holistic healthcare solutions that address unmet needs and increase access to prescription drugs via RX to OTC switch. She comes with a vast experience in presenting to regulatory agency meetings globally, creating new and unique claims for products and representing her company for numerous media interviews on TV, radio, and print. Vidhu has over 20 years experience in the R&D, medical affairs, clinical research, R&D innovation, pipeline creation and delivery, and leading large R&D teams across pharma and consumer healthcare. So before I hand over the session to Vidhu, we have a Q&A session in the end. Feel free to send in your questions in the chat box below. Let's welcome Vidhu, our speaker for today.
Thank you so much, Caroline. I really appreciate the gracious introduction, and I'm thrilled to be here today with everyone, and wanted to just express my sincere thank you and appreciation to all the organizers that were involved in bringing this entire conference together, and especially allowing me to present on this really important topic that I have a real passion for. So next slide. So just quickly, in terms of the agenda for today, this is a fairly short talk, so I'll start with current challenges with the data in the pharma and consumer healthcare industry. I'll talk about some examples where we're leveraging data to extract value. I will get into a little bit around digital upskilling and mindset shift, because that's fundamental to how we can actually enable change. And then we will end with the Q&A session. So next slide. In terms of current challenges with data in pharma and consumer healthcare, it's not very different actually in the two. So next slide, I will start with several, just a bird's eye view of the different challenges and then get into some use cases. So this may not be unfamiliar to those in different industries, but our data exists in silos and in different formats. So we have data in everything from Excel spreadsheets to PDFs to PowerPoint slides, and it's sitting in all different repositories. It could be on someone's computer. It could be in a shared drive that's no longer active, and it's very fragmented. So that's a really big challenge for us as companies go into joint ventures and merge, and more data comes in and we try to harmonize them. The other is there's a lack of consistent data standard. How we capture data, the terms we use to capture data is actually very different depending on the time in which it was captured, the evolving science, the overall terms used, and the manner in which it was pulled together. So that's another big issue that we have to overcome. It's also a very complex IT landscape because there are so many solutions that are offered to the industry that each one has its pros and cons. And what IT solution is best for what problem creates added complexity. There's also a lack of support structures for data scientists. So a new evolving area, I shouldn't say brand new, but relatively new in our industry, is bringing on board more data scientists. But our industry has never had that functionality in the past. So having the right support structures for them to do their job their best needs to be put into place. We also have a lot of manual process and end-to-end R&D. As you can imagine, we're developing drugs, we're developing consumer healthcare products, depending on which side of the spectrum you're on. For drugs, they're immensely regulated, but anything you ingest is immensely regulated by the Food and Drug Administration. So everything we do has to be done with a certain amount of rigor. And to do that, we have historically been doing them using very manual processes. And so there's a lot of hesitancy to embrace digitized techniques because these manual processes have given us success. And now to have to shift and rely on something that's more digitized based on data that's very fragmented is a very difficult thing for people to swallow and say, okay, we could put hand on heart and go to the regulators and say, this is still accurate. So there's a piece of that we have to bring together with rigor as we digitally transform our area. We also have fairly narrow skill sets in digital transformation in our industry, so we need to upskill with the right experts and bring them in. There's a lack of sharing data between departments. There's a lot of territorialness. Well, I'm in this department, so I won't share my data with you and such. So that's another mindset shift that needs to be changed. And just overall mindset, being open to innovation and new ways of of doing things that we haven't been accustomed to doing is another part of, I think, what we need to overcome. So that's just a quick bird's eye view of the current challenges that we're facing in our industry. Next slide. Some use cases now that can bring some of this to life. So in terms of predicting patient or consumer trends, a lot of what we do is driven by insight and backed by science. So is there a desire by people to want something? I know you could say with the Apple phone, no one knew that we ever wanted, the market research didn't work very well there because it was such a novel, disruptive innovation. Similarly here, we have something similar, but on the other hand, we have existing products that may not have that experience that consumers are looking for. As an example, things like cough syrup or things like vitamins, where people have a bitter aftertaste, or the pill is too big that they can't get it down their throat, or they have an aftertaste if they're brushing with a professional toothpaste or oral rinse. These are just some examples of what can we do to maximize that consumer sensorial experience. So organoleptically, we could create something that's much more delightful to that end user. So what we've started to put into place is we're using artificial intelligence to monitor 24/7 certain websites and social media where people tend to talk about health and the products they use for their health and their expectations of those products and whether they're meeting those expectations. And many times within the conversations, you find ideas and you also find potentially future trends that are not yet trends. So it's a twofold objective, but how can we reduce our prototypes? When we put a given product in for development, we also put a number of different backups in. So can we reduce the number of prototypes by being much more laser focused around the consumer insight, the patient insight in terms of the unmet need? And thereby, could we test them in a less expensive way? Can we develop models that predict subjective opinion? That's very hard because it's subjective, but could we do so based on objective properties? There are certain properties of chemicals like pH, viscosity, acidity, etc., that can be used to predict what an average consumer reaction would be. So if we were to put these things into place, and we have as pilots already, it could really help reduce the number of tests that we do and ultimately shorten our time to market. So those are kind of the business advantages we would reap if we were to, put this more full scale. So the way we go about our use cases, we start with test and learn. We do small pilots on select areas, and then we start to scale them out as we see wins. And we hope to generate that as a way of working across the portfolio if it is successful in the test and learn. So next use case, next slide. So the other piece of what we really need to overcome is leveraging historic data to enable new innovations. It's interesting that our industry sits on billions of dollars, pounds of data that we actually don't go back and look at often. So we may look at the last year or 2 years or 3 years, but we don't look at the data in its totality because people who worked on it 10, 15 years ago have left. That data is missing, or we don't even know it exists. So there's this immense fragmentation of data that I was outlining earlier. But if we were to have a way to leverage that data in totality, we could create all sorts of post hoc analyses that would allow us to then go off and create new innovations. So one example is there was an R&D team that was manually comparing images each time they launched a new product, which was like a really time-consuming process. And the solution was, could we create data, a pipeline of it to ingest the image data and automate image analysis using machine learning. So this way we didn't need to go through such a process. And that in turn reduces analysis time from weeks to minutes. It allows comparisons across multiple trials, and it freed up resources. So those are kind of the very positive business impacts one could have as you start to use things like machine learning and AI, et cetera, to process data that come in different formats that we would at once upon a time do only manually. Next slide. So another part of this is creating searchable tools. We do have an extensive amount of data that's never looked at again. And because of turnover, because of mergers, because of the evolution of companies, the data gets lost in the system. So the idea was, could we create an internal Google search engine, which probably seems very elementary, but not as easy a task to actually do with the amount of fragmentation of data we have. But this would allow our scientists to easily find data. whether they're newer employees to the company or older. It kind of takes all of that away, and it takes away the need to have to track someone down who worked on this 10 years ago. So it saves a lot of time in terms of resource, which would otherwise be spent looking for data or potentially even regenerating new data. And it could lead to new innovations in a shorter time frame. So we feel it allows for more informed decisions to be made by having more visibility to more data upfront. So that's another really interesting one that would drives a lot of value for us in different ways. Next slide. This is an interesting one. How can we respond to regulatory environment driven requests with urgency? So there have been over time many ingredients that have been called into question by the regulatory agency because it has been found that the ingredient is associated with carcinogenic properties and can cause cancer, or the ingredient has degradants and those are toxic to a certain organ in your body and thereby needs to be removed and recalled from the market. Many times some of these ingredients are not active ingredients. They're just part of the ingredients that help fill the tablet or help create the texture of the product. It puts companies in a very reactive mode. So what we did was we created a database that allows you to search what products in your portfolio have a given ingredient and in what geography and what the net revenue is for that product in that geography. And what this allows us to do is when you have this kind of an emergent thing happen in the environment, you could say in minutes, okay, this would impact our portfolio by 20%, 30%, and our overall net revenue impact would be this. So you know how significant or insignificant it is to your overall business. And in addition, this would allow us to have a way of a system to propose alternate ingredients based on the chemical structure. So we want to be able to, again, use AI to be able to say, well, these ingredients can have alternate options based on their chemical structure and overall physical property. And that could be a replacement to that ingredient if we need to replace it. So we could kind of move a little faster and be more proactive as opposed to being reactive in the moment. And this pilot we've already put in place, and it has been wonderful to quickly inform us of those impacts, in seconds and minutes, as opposed to it took weeks. We'd be contacting GMs in certain markets to find out, what impact does this have on your portfolio? And there was so much lag time to get all of that information. So this really saves a lot of that time, but it also allows us to start to think about reformulation and what we could be doing to reformulate in terms of ingredient options, which also saves a lot of time as opposed to testing things manually and figuring out physical compatibility of chemicals. So that's the next, that's a really interesting use case. The next one here is about using predictive modeling in product development. So many times, whether it's a new chemical entity we're trying to bring to market for a chronic condition like diabetes or arthritis or osteoporosis, etc., or if it's just a new product we're trying to bring from an OTC standpoint that's better than anything else on market for your cough or cold or headache. The product development process is very manual and laborious because, again, we have to create a number of different prototypes trying to anticipate what may or may not make it in terms of the overall chemistry over time, the stability, etc. So we put in those prototypes, and that is expensive and time consuming. So a solution here could be in silico product development, and there's several companies starting to do this and have been doing it successfully, as using computerized models with these natural learning processes that could be valuable in narrowing down the prototypes. And also helping us predict a probability of success sooner. That would actually allow a much more efficient way to utilize R&D funding because we have a limited amount, and it would help us make smarter choices earlier as opposed to starting things and then finding out later, and now that money is sunk. So this is just allows us to be much smarter earlier on in the process. Next slide. So I want to get into a little bit, shifting from use cases to digital upskilling and mindset, and just talk a little bit about what we've been doing here. So next slide, we'll talk about, it was important to me that while we're doing these test and learns and rewarding failures, because, we want people to have quick, fast fails in order to create a more innovative culture. But a part of it is also coming over the apprehension a lot of our scientists and colleagues have with regards to adapting and embracing digital techniques and methods like AI and machine learning, etc. So I collaborated with the University College of London to create an accredited program that would allow our employees to get a diploma after they completed it. And it requires about 15 hours of their time, and they have a year to complete it. And what this program does is I designed it so it's very personalized to research and development organization within our our company, because I have a sense of where we have challenges and where we really need to help people upskill, because many folks went to school many years ago and this is a new area for them. It's uncomfortable. So how do we make them more comfortable with adapting to these techniques and educating them? So that's what inspired me to kind of work on something like this that is free to our employees, and anyone can take it. It could be marketing, it could be a business executive, but it was targeted towards the research and development organization, really to shift mindset, but also to motivate them to upskill and get them to embrace these techniques. And it's okay if you fail the first time you experiment. So this is now in place, and we have several hundred people enrolled in the program. So we're really, really excited about it. And it's something we launched at the end of April this year. So that's a critical part of how we're doing this. So I know that was a bit of a whirlwind. I hope I was able to keep everyone's attention. We can move into Q&A. I think I love this quote by Albert Einstein. I'm sure many of you have seen it around insanity. But if we keep doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results, it really is insanity. And we have a habit of doing that. So we need to move away, be more innovative, and embrace new ways of doing things. So with that, Caroline, I'm going to hand back to you to help me with the Q&A session.
Thank you so much, Vidhu. That was a very interesting presentation. I have a couple of questions from a few of our attendees here. Let me start with the first question. What is the biggest challenge that you foresee in terms of digitizing ways of working and leveraging data in your industry?
I think the biggest challenge is, one, overcoming the fragmentation of data. It is so immensely fragmented because you have product development groups, microbiology groups, you have stability groups, then you have clinical groups, toxicology groups, pharmacovigilance groups. You have so many different groups generating data, and it all sits in so many different places and formats. We really need to harmonize that data so that it works in a way where we can allow ourselves to look at the totality of it and analyze it. So I think that's one of the biggest things. And the second would be a mind shift change, because we really have a lot of intrigued but hesitant colleagues who are very cautious about wanting to adapt to these kinds of things, because they feel that, what if this leads to a mistake? What if it leads to something inaccurate? How can we ensure we maximize accuracy with our regulators? So there's a lot of that plays into this. And I think we have to really work on shifting that mindset to a growth mindset as we try to harmonize data as our biggest challenges. Any other questions, Caroline? You're on mute.
I'm sorry, I'm on mute. So the next question, Vidhu, how do you identify good data and bad data in a critical life-saving industry like yours?
That's a really good question. I think we look at precedents, frankly, precedents of what the totality of data has showed. If we have an anomaly, an outlier, we do like to look at the design of the experiment, the assumptions we're making to get to the conclusion, and really test those out. We do what we call wargaming to basically create a mock environment where some of us play the role of the regulator to see if there are ways that we can create better justification. It's a really hard question. It's a good question. It's a hard question to say what's good or bad data. I think obviously bad data is data that's collected without following the rigor and standards needed from GCP, which is good clinical practices. We have a lot of SOPs, as you can imagine, and a lot of processes that we have to follow with tremendous rigor and documentation. And we have systems that document exactly the time, the user, and what changes have been made and why. And we're trying to link that back with our laboratory equipment and with our case report form, so that there's really no opportunity to do anything funny with the data. It's all very harmonized. We also lock the data, at which point you can't go back and make any changes without formally querying the data. That becomes part of the file. So it depends on the stringency of the methods followed and the protocol, frankly, the way it was designed and how well it was followed in terms of good and bad data.
Thank you. I have another question, Vidhu. Have you consolidated all your data in the data lake? How much of data needs are unstructured?
So the answer is no. We have not completed putting all of our data in a data lake. Much of it still remains in a very fragmented way. That's the exercise we're currently trying to undertake. What was the second part of the question, Caroline? I'm sorry.
How much of data needs are unstructured?
I would say, if I had to put a percentage on it, about 70% is unstructured. So it's a huge proportion of our data remains unstructured, which is the complexity that we're facing.
Okay. As a part of GMP, what all you need to do for building the data lake?
That would really be best posed to our supply chain team. And I'm not in supply chain for good manufacturing practices. I'm more on the R&D side. But a lot of what they have to do is to understand the volumes, the estimated volumes of the sales that our marketing team is putting forward for a given product. And they need to be able to work with our contract manufacturing organizations to ensure we're able to build that volume up. How can we forecast more accurately? How can we, target the United States in different ways? The North, the South, the East, and the West have different purchase patterns, different needs. So there's a lot of ways of how the supply group looks at this. And it's really not my area of expertise. So it's a difficult one for me to answer with full accuracy, but that's just to give you a flavor of what they need to be thinking about. What exactly they need from a data perspective is one that I can't answer.
Great. I have another interesting question. How do you work with IT to implement solutions?
So, we have a team, and the group that is partnered with me is someone. So I have a partner, an R&D partner in IT, and his role is to help me with all of these kinds of use cases. My role is to bring some of these challenges to him, but my role is also to bring a value proposition. So we have to rank prioritize of our use cases, which ones would give the most value to the organization. And then he deploys people on his team dependent on whether the value proposition is worthy enough to do so, and starts to help landscape if there are vendors on the external side that we could bring in to help us solve the problem. Is it one that we use internal resources to solve the problem? Is there something where we can get speed to market if we go externally? Are there advantages, disadvantages, etc.? But that person helps me create that landscape, that external landscape of vendors and companies that we can go to help solve certain problems. But I have a very tight partnership with my IT, my tech person, along with my data analytics, data scientist group. So we work together in side by side to bring these forward.
Great. So maybe I'll just take another two questions. One of our participants want you to talk about upskill. How do you, talk more about how do you upskill your team? Was this program difficult to justify, set up, execute? How effective has it been?
It's an excellent question. So we launched it in April, end of April. So it's not a program that I just took from an academic institution and brought into the company. It's a program that I actually designed based on the business problems I see that can be solved using digitized techniques. And what I tried to do was I tried to bring a variety of speakers into the program. So we have some external key opinion leaders, but they partner with the internal expert of that area. So this way, it brings a credibility to the internal colleagues, right? Because there's someone who is known internally to be an expert in a space, and we're asking that person to basically co-present with an external expert on the given topic and talk about some of the problems we're facing and how to solve for them and what's coming in the future in their area. So we segmented the program. So I have a product development section, I have predictive modeling, I have a clinical section. We have a how do you predict consumer trends? How do you make the consumer patient experience the most delightful it can be? What is the science we need to be looking at, and how do we look at it from a digital lens? So this is just to give you a flavor. It's a very, the way it was designed and pulled together was very much focused around the needs of what we needed as an organization. And after I did that, I basically designed it on paper, and I went and tried to get buy-in from all the different stakeholders, and then went and pitched it to different academic organizations to see who would be willing to partner with me. It took a long time, a lot of patience, but we were able to do it. And it has been very successful. So we have about 1,500 R&D colleagues, and we have almost half of them, enrolled and going in the program. So I think that's a pretty big success. We obviously want as many of those people in our program, but they have a year to do it. So, people can still enroll and they're still enrolling. And the other thing that's great is we have many individuals from other groups outside of R&D. For example, marketing, strategy, quality, supply. So it's wonderful to see that the program has attracted so much attention and interest across the organization. So it feels like a success, but I want to be humble. I want to keep trying to improve the program. And I would honestly like, if we continue to get this great reception, I'd like to create a mini MBA program as a next step to continue the upskilling in this area.
Thank you so much, Vidhu. There are a couple of other questions, but we'll make sure we'll have them answered to you because we have a hard stop right now. And I would again like to thank Vidhu for taking time off and, consenting to being a speaker on our conference, on a Be Connected conference. Thank you, everybody, for joining this session and hope to see you in the next one. Thank you and have a great day. Bye-bye.
Thank you.